You're listening to the Mythcreant podcast with your hosts, Oren Ashkenazi and Chris Winkle.
There was a castle by a waterfall with a pink and purple wall and a princess living there. She had no parents and was all alone. She got by on her own and she liked it pretty well. 'Cause she never wore socks. She had a pet snake. She bought a red guitar and she ate a whole cake. And there wasn't anybody there to tell her what to do, so she did what she wanted to. Everybody knew the story of the princess who saved herself.
And welcome everyone to another episode of the Mythcreants podcast. I'm Oren.
And I'm Chris.
So Chris, do you remember back in 2014, 12 years ago, we had a debate about multiple points of view?
Yeah, I couldn't forget that because I won.
Yeah, see, I pretended to change my opinion, and I've been planning my revenge for all that time. Which is why now you need to beta read my new novel with 500 different POV characters, each in their own universe and time period. Or maybe not. Maybe I've decided that you've suffered enough and that I forgive you.
Feel like that's a self-owned. Feel like that's self-revenge right there.
So today we are talking about the concepts of revenge and forgiveness in fiction, specifically in fiction. I'm not making any claims to real life, mind you. That's a little more complicated.
Yeah, I mean, I could describe what causes a large group of people in general to forgive a person that they do not know personally. Like a character or a public figure.
Yeah.
In general trends, I cannot predict what any individual person needs to forgive somebody in their life. Those two things are very different.
So first, there's a concept that I see storytellers talk about sometimes with a lot of concern, and it's this idea of a character being forced to forgive someone.
I can definitely sympathize that.
Yeah.
I think that's what happens when the GM creates antagonists that you just love to hate,
Yeah.
but then instead of letting you fight them and beat them, he decides to make them sympathetic and then so pathetic and pliant that you're not really allowed to beat them up anymore. So you grudgingly start working with them, and then the other players think your PC is unreasonable for not forgiving them. This sound familiar, Oren? Does it sound like a familiar scenario?
Yeah, well... I mean, this is a whole different ballgame when it comes to role-playing games because, those characters have free will and you can't edit the story.
But couldn't force me to forgive, but some of the other players were like, really? You can't forgive this person? No, never. Not doing it.
I mean, there is like a prose fiction analogy to that, which is that the reader might disagree with the character, right? That can happen. But when it comes to fiction, the way that I would advise people to look at this is you are not trying to force your character to do anything. You are trying to create proper circumstances so that this character, given what you have established about them before, will do the thing you want them to do. So if that means you want your character to forgive someone, you have to create the circumstances under which it makes sense for them to do that.
Yeah, I want to be fair because I do think some narratives create this impression of forcing forgiveness. For one, there's the obvious thing of the other side characters who are clearly supposed to be the storyteller's mouthpiece, insisting that somebody has to forgive.
Yeah, if you have direct badgering of your protagonist or some other character by another character in the story, that is definitely going to change the dynamic of it.
Right. And again, we're talking about situations where somebody has seriously wronged another person. Just to be clear, what we're going off of is the idea that nobody is entitled to forgiveness by somebody they hurt.
Right.
So there can be obviously situations where the side characters act like the storyteller's mouthpiece and insist on it, which is clearly a sign of that pressure.
Yeah.
But I do think that sometimes there's almost nothing that is necessary for a character to forgive in order to do. Because character functionally can take all the same actions usually to succeed without technically forgiving.
Right.
Forgiving is different than, for instance, cooperating.
Right. That gets into the next part of the question, which, what is forgiveness exactly? What does that mean? Because that can mean a lot of different things, and it matters in this case. This isn't just a silly semantics question, because I think some writers tend to imagine it as we're friends now, and we're on the same team, and I've decided that I am no longer upset by whatever it was that you did. And that can happen, but that's not the only thing that I think we would think of that way, right? It's not the only way this kind of story can play out.
Yeah, I would think of a lot of different things as alternatives to forgiveness. I think if I were to pick one thing that is forgiveness, is that you are no longer holding whatever they did against that person.
Right.
And that's in a lot of situations still not reasonable as like an emotional thing.
This sort of thing can happen when you have your bad guy do something really bad. They did a real nasty thing. But then you kind of end up liking them. You decide, oh, but they're kind of cool and they have a sympathetic backstory. And now I want them to be on team good and I want my main character to hang out with them and for it to not be constantly unpleasant. And if your reader is reading this and they're like, well, hang on, that horrible thing happened. I felt that. You did a good job making me feel that. I don't like this. Right?
Yeah.
And of course, there's the two questions. There's the question of, does it feel like it makes sense that the main character did this? And people will argue about that because that often gets tied into the question of, is it satisfying that the main character did this? And if someone doesn't feel that it's satisfying, they will often express that by arguing that it does not make sense, regardless of whether that part is true or not, right? You might actually have made a character who is super forgiving. Maybe your character is Toru from Fruits Basket, who forgives everything immediately, but that might not be satisfying to your reader, and you could still find them arguing with you that it doesn't make sense, because that's often how readers express themselves.
I do think that in situations where the readers are still upset after a character like Toru forgives somebody, there's probably something else going on.
Yeah.
Because people do resent a character who does terrible things and then is successful. People want to see that karma balanced out. And I would say that the issue there probably isn't completely just the forgiveness itself, right? But that character hasn't gotten their karma balanced, hasn't suffered in accordance with the wrongdoing.
Right. I mean, in Fruits Basket, I had a problem with that. The matriarch of the family, who is just the worst, I felt like she got off completely scot-free for all the horrible things she did and is now having a great time. And I did not like that. I was like, no, that person sucks. I don't want any of you to be associated with her anymore.
Right. I mean, this is the issue with a lot of abuse narratives, right? Because that was an abuse narrative. She was very clearly an abuser.
Yeah.
Is often when people are writing these narratives, maybe they feel like it's too black and white to just say, hey, that person is bad. And we're just going to, for at the very least, not have them in my life anymore.
Yeah.
You know, for the protagonist part. And I think it's in an effort to try to make it nuanced. They try to absolve them or make excuses for them and be like, oh, there's a person too. That's very common. And it's not great because, unfortunately, in real life, abusers will absolutely use any shred of sympathy you give them. They will apologize and pretend they'll never do it again, only to do it again. Because they're manipulative people. That's how abuse is done.
Right.
That's definitely a problem there. And that might be part of the fact that people don't like Toro doing it. But I do think that there are some storylines where if the author equates working with somebody with forgiving them, and there doesn't seem like we're presented with an option of, no, you can cooperate, but you still don't have to forgive.
Right.
Or it doesn't feel natural for the character. There can be other reasons where it just feels a little too contrived. Or I think some storytellers do equate forgiveness with, this is just how the arc should end, because the arc hasn't ended unless there's forgiveness, for instance.
Yeah. And of course, we were talking about this in terms of revenge, which adds another wrinkle to it. Because, for example, you could have a story where the protagonist chooses not to take revenge, and that doesn't necessarily mean they have forgiven whoever wronged them. It could mean that they have decided that this is more harmful to me than it is satisfying to get whatever this revenge is, so I'm going to stop. But that doesn't mean that we're friends. That doesn't mean that I've stopped holding that against them.
Yeah, there are a lot of different things that can happen besides just forgiveness and revenge. And I think talking more about what the alternatives are is a good thing. Personally, I think self-forgiveness is underrated. If we have one person who's being redeemed, for instance, and another person who wants revenge on them, or just is angry at them, have the person forgive themselves, even if they're never going to get forgiveness from the person they hurt.
Yeah.
Eventually, once they've groveled enough, of course.
Yeah, once they've had kind of a rough time. This also, of course, raises the question that comes up in a lot of these revenge stories. Is revenge a compelling motivation? And the answer is maybe.
Yeah. If you get one of those characters that you make it so the audience really hates them that much and wants them to take them down a notch, it can be compelling. I personally wouldn't try to rely on that.
Right. For revenge to be the stakes, you have to really make the audience want that to happen. And so usually for that, you're depending on them really liking your main character, which is always a gamble because sometimes that's not going to work right away. And you are gambling on that they will really care about whatever the thing is. So that means you often have to make it pretty intense. And some people just go for that. Some people really like revenge stories, but others will kind of be like, well, I mean, the thing that they were trying to get revenge for already happened.
Mm-hmm.
Getting revenge isn't going to undo it, so is it that important?
Yeah. I mean, isn't that why in John Wick, the bad guy kills a dog?
Mm-hmm.
Because people get really upset watching a dog die. And so that's a way of getting them upset enough that they really want to see the antagonist die.
Yeah.
A bit harsh. I wouldn't want to do that, but it's clearly worked for the franchise.
Yeah, well, it's so well known with John Wick now at this point. I feel like if you did it, it would be hard-pressed to not look like you were copying John Wick.
Yeah, but I certainly wouldn't want wanting to see a villain suffer, getting that schadenfreude, be the only thing driving the story forward.
Right, which is usually why authors will add some additional stakes, like this villain is still doing bad things, and so part of getting revenge will be stopping them. Or sometimes they'll make it more of a broader justice issue, like this person has wronged a lot of people, and so we have to get justice for them.
I also think when it comes to stakes, if you have something, some level of support, you can do a lot with just putting your protagonist in danger in order to get revenge. If we have a John Wick situation where we think that the audience is very likely to sympathize with this revenge quest and sympathize with our protagonist, and we don't have larger stakes, but we can make it feel like the protagonist is in danger when they are going to get revenge. That is stakes in itself.
Yeah.
It just, you need to tide the audience over before your protagonist gets in danger. And of course, you need a strong enough motivation for your protagonist to head into danger.
Right.
But with revenge, I think that's not too hard. If we're going with John Wick as a power fantasy, that maybe doesn't work as well.
Yeah.
Because then John Wick is probably less likely to feel like he's in serious danger. And so the stakes then become a little bit less compelling. But in a lot of works, that would be just fine if you don't have some evil plan that the antagonist is about to do.
Yeah. The other, of course, issue is if you do decide to add supplementary stakes and then you end up wanting the protagonist to decide that actually they're not going to take revenge. It's like, all right, but what about all the bad stuff the bad guy is still doing, right? Now it feels like you're shirking your responsibility. I see this happen sometimes in stories that are inspired by superhero comics, where it's like, no, I won't get revenge on the villain. It's like, all right, but the villain is holding the city hostage, so maybe you still gotta stop him.
Yeah, I think the problem with a lot of the superhero stuff is the assumption is that you can't really put them in jail because they'll just get out again for the next installment.
Yeah, it's weird because that's almost never a thing in the story. It's just a thing that infects fan discourse because it's like a meta problem.
But it's hard to unsee once you know that's always going to happen.
Yeah, it's like, oh, this is kind of predictable that they're going to break out again.
I swear it's going to be very permanent.
Right.
The prison has become very permanent this time.
That's one of those things that superhero comics can get away with that if any of us tried it, it would immediately get us laughed out of town. I mean, first of all, writing a series long enough for this to be an issue is unlikely for most of us anyway. But if you had a series that was several books long and the villain kept breaking out of jail to go do more mayhem and cause more destruction, by the second or third time this happened, your readers would just not continue if your main character was like, yep, back to jail with you, Mr. Jail Escaper.
Well, I think in most cases the villain would just get very old. People
Right.
would just well, you already beat that person. That's not scary.
Right, which is fortunately not a problem most books have. In my experience, that problem is much more common in visual media.
Yeah, because you have an actor and the villain is more charismatic and
Yeah, or in the case of comics, because the villain is a brand.
yeah.
The only time I can think of off the top of my head that this happened in a book series is the first 3 Wheel of Time books, where we fight the same guy and beat him 3 times.
That is too much.
It's like the rule of 3, I guess.
Yeah. The other thing to point out, if your character is going to reconsider, is have they been murdering any minions?
Yeah.
Because if you want to do the big action sequence where they have to get through all of the goons before they work their way up to the big bad, it's a really bad look to then agonize over whether you're going to kill somebody after you've been throwing people off of roofs. Those people died, and you didn't agonize over whether you should kill them, even though they're just earning a paycheck. They could have been strong-armed into taking this job. They could be desperate, not have any other options, and killed them without a thought.
Yeah.
But no, the big bad's got to go to jail. And like, that's just very tiresome.
They shouldn't have been wearing helmets, Chris. If they wanted me to think of them as human beings, I should have been able to see their faces.
Yeah. I do think one of the more interesting parts of the Jessica Jones show was the fact that because the minions were just blatantly being mind controlled, she had to avoid hurting them too much when she was fighting.
Yeah.
And that did make things harder for her.
Yeah, that was very good.
So that could be interesting and tense. I think a lot of people don't want to do it because they just want their power fantasy, or it takes more thought to avoid killing anybody.
Yeah. I will say that also, if you want your character to take revenge, you can just do that. Most of the time. There are some things I see writers do that make that a little weird, but you just go for it, man. We're not here to have to write our stories to say that revenge is always bad and you should never do it. That's not one of our moral hills that we're prepared to die on.
Have your protagonist take revenge, and then the villain's kid will get really mad and vow revenge on the protagonist, and then you've got book 2.
Yeah, that is a scenario where you do have to think about this sort of thing,
Yeah.
right? If you're doing a really realistic cycle of violence, I'm getting revenge on them because they got revenge on me, and now they're gonna do it again. It's like, well, okay, then you have to consider what you're doing. At that point, if they get feel-good revenge and everything works out great, now you've kind of betrayed your premise.
Yeah. Them realizing that, okay, I wanted to get revenge on this person for killing my parents, and learning, oh, they were actually getting revenge on my parents, would be an interesting twist to have at the end if you wanted to change things up.
Another one that I see sometimes happen that authors sometimes struggle with is that if it feels like the villain has already suffered a lot, it might feel like a little much to then kill them. This is the thing I see happen sometimes where it's like, oh, this villain did something bad, and maybe it was off screen, or maybe in retrospect it wasn't as bad as the author thought it was, or whatever, but as part of making them pay, the villain loses everything and suffers a lot, and then you're starting to feel kind of bad for him.
Yeah, because at that point their karma's been balanced and they're starting to look sympathetic, and that resentment that is there initially goes away.
Yeah.
And that's the position where you can normally start actually redeeming a character, and killing them at that point just doesn't have no fun.
Yeah. This is often where you get into the issue of things that happened on screen versus off screen, and it's just a fact that if something happened off screen, your readers will not feel it as much. They won't care about it as much. It will not seem as bad as something that they saw, or something that they personally witnessed the aftermath of.
Certainly, people judge how bad the crime is emotionally. So it's also a bigger crime to kill a character they care about, our cute dog, than it is to kill some unnamed person. That's how humans work.
Or at least it's how readers work.
Well, this all happens outside of fiction too. It's just in a context where we're talking about large groups of people, not individual people, and you don't know anybody personally, right? Like, we see these things happen on social media, where sometimes what happens is there's social media posts where people brag about killing some wild animal on their hunt, and then there's like a huge negative social media reaction and everybody's really upset they killed this animal, and then there's like a second wave of people who are like, how come you care so much more about this animal than you do about all the people who are dying? They're very predictable. And it's like, well, because they saw a picture of the animal and it's a cute animal, and so it evoked emotion, and all those people are nameless and they blur together, and so they don't evoke emotions. And this is what I mean when I say this is just how people work.
Yeah. It do be how people be doing stuff.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, the two things that I have found in your stories, what are the biggest judge of how bad it is, and therefore how much work it takes to redeem somebody and how hard would it be to forgive, is how much damage was actually done. If they try to kill somebody but fail, that's a lot more forgivable than if they succeed.
Yeah.
And then the second one is, what was their motivation? If somebody is desperate, they were being blackmailed, their mother was being held hostage, and somebody threatened to kill them unless they assassinated somebody or something like that, that is a lot more forgivable than if they are just evil or selfish in some way.
So here's a question. What do we think about the two revenge stories that immediately came to my mind, which are, of course, from Avatar: The Last Airbender? The one which is about a main character, the Southern Raiders. This is where Katara goes on a revenge quest against the guy who killed her mom and then eventually decides she's not going to kill him. And then the other one is by an NPC, Hama, the Bloodbender, who has decided she's going to get revenge by harassing travelers around this Fire Nation village. Real spooky harassment and imprisonment.
And she doesn't actually kill them.
No.
We want this to be light, so she just kidnaps them. She does not actually kill any of them. even though realistically she would.
Kidnaps them and puts them in cave jail for a while. And it's like, this is a very strange revenge thing you're doing, Hama.
Yeah.
You know, watching that episode now, it's like, okay, this is a good episode. It's real spooky and weird. But I also kind of feel like maybe you could have been like, hey, Hama, how about instead of harassing the people in this village, you join us and help the war effort and then get real revenge?
Yeah.
Maybe we could make that offer.
The issue there is the fact that she's not actually targeting the people who genuinely did.
Mhm.
Well, most people would say that an entire nation is not responsible for, the actions of its soldiers, for instance.
Yeah.
So the fact that she's just targeting civilians would be a reason that's just not considered moral. But conveniently, she doesn't actually kill any of them. So I think that she is forgivable in this case.
Yeah, it worked out. Everything was fine.
Granted, realistically, those people would be very traumatized. I mean, they were like puppeteered. And how long were they kidnapped anyway? I don't know.
A couple weeks at least.
Don't think about that.
Yeah, it's fine.
The one with Katara, I'm trying to remember because I do remember when they finally presented the object of her revenge, he was just kind of old and pathetic.
Yeah, what we found out is that the Fire Nation retirement package sucks. This guy was a high-ranking naval officer, looked like he commanded a squadron of ships, and in his retirement, he's carrying a bag of shitty groceries. It's like, wow, okay, I guess they didn't pay him very much.
Yeah, that clearly felt like it was part of an arc where her getting revenge was just supposed to be bad.
Mm-hmm.
And I can definitely see somebody looking at that and thinking that is an instance of forced forgiveness. Because Zuko is totally fine with her getting revenge.
Yeah.
But I don't think Zuko is supposed to be the morally correct one in this scenario. Instead, she goes off wanting revenge. I think that's supposed to be bad. And then she happens to find that this guy is kind of old and very down on his luck when she could have found something else.
Right. If he had been having a really nice retirement with all of the plunder that he got for years of commanding a raiding squadron, that ending doesn't work at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's already a contentious ending, but if he'd just been living the high life, like, no, you better kill him, Katara.
Yeah. It would also feel inappropriate for Avatar The Last Airbender tonal-wise, though, for her to just go off on a quest to kill a guy.
Right, because no one kills anybody in Avatar The Last Airbender except suddenly in the end of Season 3 where there's a big concern about it.
Right. And there's not really a whole lot of opportunity for them to like kidnap Fire Nation commanders and bring them to justice because the Fire Nation is still conquering during the time of the story. I'm not sure there's a whole lot of ways to do that storyline that would actually fit the show.
I have been thinking about what on earth the political situation in the Fire Nation would be like after the show.
Mm-hmm.
When I try to think about it in terms of how this sort of politics usually works, it just completely breaks my brain. I'm like, okay, so the Fire Nation was never really defeated. They did lose one battle around Ba Sing Se, and then their leader was quasi-assassinated and replaced by a pro-peace heir who sort of came out of nowhere. So the Fire Nation certainly doesn't think it's been defeated. Its military hasn't been defeated. Are they gonna listen to Zuko when he says, okay, war over, we're all going home? Are they gonna pay war reparations? Is anyone gonna stand trial for what they... Oh man, that is such a rough thing to imagine.
I think what we would want to show to make that better is the toll that the war effort is taking on the Fire Nation.
Mm-hmm.
That it's like costing a lot of money, that people are going through rationing, soldiers are coming home in body bags.
Yeah.
And so there's general popular discontent over the war. And I think that would be a lot easier to justify than an heir stepping on the throne of just being like, yep, we're not doing this anymore.
Yeah, no, but instead we see the opposite. The people of the Fire Nation seem very happy.
Because the Fire Nation's got to be threatening, right?
Right.
So it has to seem super successful.
Which is not unrealistic, but it does make it really weird to imagine what happened after the show ended. All right, well, with that, I think we will go ahead and call this episode to a close.
And if you forgive us for our transgressions, consider supporting us on Patreon. And if you want revenge on us, you can totally do that by supporting us on Patreon. Then you'll be in our Discord and all that.
Yeah, we hate it so much.
The best revenge plot, for sure. Just go to patreon.com/Mythcreants.
And before we go, I want to thank a couple of our existing patrons. First, there's Amon Jabber. He's an urban fantasy writer and a connoisseur of Marvel. Then there's Kathy Ferguson, who's a professor of political theory in Star Trek. We will talk to you next week.
There was a dragon with a pointy tail. He was bigger than a whale and his breath was terrible. He scared the princess when he came around. Tried to burn the castle down, but she caught him by his tail. Then she tied him to a tree so the dragon couldn't fly. She told him he was mean
This has been the Mythcreant podcast. Opening closing theme, The Princess Who Saved Herself by Jonathan Colton.